Welcome to another edition of Media Rants. Hey, you all saw recently that the Trump administration, through their FCC commissioner or chair of the FCC, Brendan Carr, went full gangster. I think Mr. Carr said that ABC could get rid of Jimmy Kimmel the easy way or the hard way. Make a long story short, Kimmel was suspended. Suspension didn't last even a week. He came back. Not sure what's going to happen at this point, but to talk about the FCC, the Kimmel situation, and other issues of media, I've got really great scholar and a former student of mine, actually, Dr. Chris Terry. Chris, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Always, Tony. It's always great to see you.
Absolutely. Chris is an associate professor and Cowles Fellow of Journalism, Law, and Policy in the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Comm at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He received his doctorate from UW Madison in 2012. And you were at UW Oshkosh. When did you graduate from UW Oshkosh?
Technically or unofficially? 98. Well, I graduated in 98.
1998. He spent more than 15 years as a producer in commercial radio, and his research agenda includes regulatory and legal analysis of media ownership, internet policy, and political advertising. His research, I'm so proud of you, Chris, as are all your former faculty here. Chris's research has been cited by the FCC and in filings with the U.S. Supreme Court. So I can't think of anyone, Chris, that I'd much rather talk to about what's going on with the FCC. So when Brendan Carr went gangster on Kimmel, is that kind of unprecedented for the FCC?
Well, it certainly is in the modern era, but I actually kind of reject the idea that he went gangster. If he went gangster, it's kind of rubber knife gangster. What really happened in this story, seriously, what really happened in this story is that ABC buckled under at the merest of wins. Carr and Trump and everything involved here had absolutely no way to go after this in any meaningful way. Carr shoots his mouth off, which he does. I don't know if anybody pays attention to Brendan Carr quite as much as I do, but he shot his mouth off, and ABC knuckled under as fast as they could move. And there was literally, and I mean that literally, nothing Carr could have done to Disney or ABC about Kimmel.
Why do you think they buckled under? Why did they buckle under so quickly?
Well, it's all about business and structure. Disney and ABC only own 8 television stations in the United States, right? Local stations. They have 8 O&Os in the entire United States. Mm-hmm. But they're distributed, ABC's affiliates are owned primarily by 3 companies: Sinclair, Nexstar, and Tenja. All 3 of those companies have been salivating at the prospect of what's about to happen here in just a few days. And that is that the FCC is going to try to revise the television ownership rules. These rules have been on the books arguably since 1996, but officially since 2002. That includes a cap on the number of stations that a single company can own nationwide, but also how they can own them in an individual media market. Tenja and Nexstar have been trying to merge for years, but haven't been able to do so because the rules have prevented it. Those rules have been tied up in a series of court battles for over 20 years, but the FCC is going to get a fresh crack at it. In March of this year, the 8th Circuit finally gave the FCC the go-ahead to move forward on revising those rules. It's been in and out of the Supreme Court. It's been out of the 3rd Circuit so many times, it's ridiculous. I've spent basically most of my academic career tracing that.
Right.
But we're at a point now, literally on the 30th of September, where the FCC is going to launch into a proceeding that's going to change those rules. And what this is really all about is that Sinclair, Tenja, and Nexstar want to stay on the right side of Brendan Carr and the rest of the Republicans at the FCC because they need the mergers that will follow those rule changes to happen quickly. And here's why. and this is not being talked about, but it is part of the structure of this. They need those mergers to move through quickly. They need them to be done by the early next year, maybe May or June of next year, so that those stations are in control of those companies by the time the political advertising dollars start to roll in ahead of next year's
Wow.
midterm elections. And that is what this is all really about.
Well, how much will the ownership cap be raised? Like you said that currently,
Substantially. But the thing that matters most is that what they are looking at doing is allowing them to own more than one of the top two stations in a market. Right now, the existing rule, and this goes all the way back to the 1970s, a single television owner could not own two of the network affiliate stations in a single market.
right,
That can't happen with the kind of ownership structures that we're talking about after Tenja and Nexstar merge. And of course, Sinclair owns duopolies all over, and then they operate joint service agreements, which are functionally duopolies in other markets too. But because ABC programming is so prominent on Nexstar and Sinclair stations, they made an effort to get Kimmel pulled. They cannot have programming that pisses off Brendan Carr on the air because Carr is an old school content regulator and he's a hardcore Trumpist. And Carr was around during the first Trump administration. He was on the FCC back then. He was one of Trump's appointees back then.
right.
And he is an old school content regulator. We haven't had anybody on the commission like him since Alfred Sykes. And that was like before I was even in broadcasting school. And what we've got here is kind of a politically motivated situation. Carr can't derail those mergers, but he can slow them down. And they don't want to be on the wrong side of that because the political advertising bonanza is when local television stations make their money. Last elective cycle, TV, broadcast TV, forget about the internet, forget about all those things. The big money in political advertising is still in local television ads. By about 60% of all political advertising spending goes into local television. So they have to have control of those stations to sell that ad and collect on that money because most political ads get bought, the time for it get bought in May and June now.
Right.
And with the contentious election that we're at least theoretically supposed to still have next year, those broadcasters need to have control of those other stations. Those mergers have to be given regulatory approval and in place so that they can have control of that money when it comes in. And that's what this
All
is
right.
about.
So let me just summarize here. So Nexstar, Sinclair, and Tenja want to have this merger. Will allow them to own more stations in big markets. They're going to have a advertising revenue bonanza, and a lot of this requires FCC approval.
All of it requires FCC approval, and the big merger will be between Tenja and Nexstar. But Sinclair wants to absorb stations that it doesn't currently own, but is operating in multiple markets.
All right. Well, let
joint
me ask
service
you
agreements.
this: is the United States Congress completely powerless in all this?
No, they could stall the implementation of the quadrennial review that Carr is about to launch into,
But
but
they
they choose
probably
not to.
won't do that, right?
No, they won't.
All right. So what are the all right, so now you've explained that these companies stand to make many, many dollars in the
Many.
political campaign cycle, right? But what are some of the other consequences of so few companies owning so many stations? What are the consequences of this?
Well, there's a study out actually today as we record this, released by the University of Delaware, that shows the more of these consolidated companies that are running TV stations, especially at the local level, the more they're reusing news across stations. So if you think about this, it's actually a study from the University of Delaware, coming out today, that shows that stations owned by Nexstar and Sinclair and several of the other larger TV corporations, what they're doing is they're operating more than one station in a market, but they're not producing news on more than one station. They're just reusing the news across it. So back home, imagine if Channel 11 was reusing news from one of the other channels.
Right.
That's exactly what's happening. They're not even pretending that it's different news. They're just rerunning the same stories, the same packages across multiple stations. Now, that's basically what consolidation of ownership was designed to do. It allowed a station, if you take two stations, they can share the resources and reduce the price of the content that they have to produce.
Mhm.
But that wasn't supposed to apply to news. The idea was you would do that for other types of content and then take the resources and put it back into the production of informational content. Well, that's of course not what happened. And if you allow these station groups to merge, you'll have even more of this process as it occurs.
So it's very similar to what happened with newspapers, right? As Gannett
And
took over all
radio.
the major newspapers in Wisconsin, I see the same stories in the Green Bay Press Gazette, the Oshkosh Northwestern, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.
Well, the Gannett owns all the papers in Wisconsin,
Exactly.
basically. And so they use the same content on all the newspapers. There's a very famous example with Gannett where all the daily papers in Wisconsin during Lent run the same story about the best types of fish to fry, right? That happens every year. They run that story, right? But the same thing happened to radio in the late 90s and early 2000s when Clear Channel and Cumulus were buying up big groups of stations. They were doing that. They were moving groups of stations together, having less people operate them, but then using content from one type of station in Cincinnati or Milwaukee and sending it out to all of that. So your DJ, which used to be in your local market, was maybe in Cincinnati or Ohio or wherever, and then you were hearing that person in all around the United States.
Right. As I said, Kimmel was suspended for less than a week, although I heard that some of the Nexstar and Sinclair owned ABC affiliates are not broadcasting him. But
Sinclair is running more news. I
right,
don't know what Nexstar's plan is. They haven't made it formal yet. So
right,
Sinclair's local stations actually produce a lot of news, but most of the news that Sinclair stations produce is actually produced at a central hub. It's actually like nationalized news, and then it's regionalized at local stations. So Sinclair is just going to expand those operations and carry more of that.
all
What's
right.
notable
But
about Sinclair is they're a very conservative company,
oh
so
yeah,
it's just basically
yeah,
pro-Trump propaganda in many
oh
ways.
yeah, Sinclair is MAGA. But
Yeah.
the fact that Disney felt pressure to lift Kimmel's suspension, is that a victory for First Amendment activism, as some people think?
No, I don't think so. I think it was sort of construed that way, but Disney did something else this week. They raised the price of their subscription service, which of course was going to cost
Yeah,
them some other subscriptions. And of course, they were bleeding people in the wake of the Kimmel suspension. So they couldn't afford to lose anyone else just on that because they were going to lose enough people when they raised the price. In fact, my wife, who isn't exactly a Jimmy Kimmel fan, asked me this past week if we should keep our Disney Plus subscription. And I'm like, because of the Jimmy Kimmel thing? She's like, no, they're raising the price. What are you talking about, the Jimmy Kimmel thing? And of course, that's exactly the point, right? That when you talk about this, Disney brought Kimmel back because they had to stem the bleeding against this backdrop that they were already going to lose a bunch of subscribers because they jacked up the rate of the streaming service. I don't suspect Kimmel will be on the air very long because Disney can't, in Disney through ABC cannot continue to feed programming to its affiliates if they're not going to clear that show because nobody's going to
exactly.
pay to advertise during Kimmel's show on the national programming if and as it is, if you add up the Sinclair and Nexstar stations, it's not on in like 39% of the United States right now, including
Okay.
some of the most major markets that there are.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you this though. Trump now is, going on Truth Social and saying we got to keep going after Kimmel. I mean, isn't that a blatant violation of the First Amendment? I mean, if the First Amendment means anything, it does mean that government should not be making any effort to censor content, especially political content. Isn't that what Trump and Carr are explicitly doing?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. They don't actually have any power to do anything about it. So them talking about it is one thing, but in legal terms, they can't actually do anything. So what we call this concept is jawboning. And this is, and a few years ago, conservatives hated this concept when they were talking about the Biden administration sort of pressuring websites like Facebook and such to take down, anti-COVID vax
Right.
content. Jawboning was considered the worst thing in the universe back then in the sort of the Murphy era of things. But now you have Trump and them doing that. And it's very clear that what Trump and Carr are doing is jawboning. But the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, and I have done, as we talked about, I've done a bunch of interviews about this, they don't actually have any real power here. And if anybody wanted to, they could stand up to him. And I used the metaphor yesterday. It's kind of like trying to rob a bank with a finger gun, right? If they give you the money, That's a win for you. But realistically, it's not supposed to work, right? So when they can, he can stand up there, both Trump and Carr, by the way, they can stand up there and stamp their feet, but they don't really have any authority or power to do anything about it other than stand up there and stomp their
I
feet.
mean, do you think the stage for this was set by, say, ABC literally giving Trump $16
Yes.
million dollars because George Stephanopoulos said that Trump was found liable for rape instead of the more accurate thing, which was he was found liable for sexual abuse and defamation? Why the hell did ABC pay out for that?
Well, I mean, I don't know why they chose to do that. They may have assumed that it was going to cost more to fight it in court. I mean, those lawsuits can be very expensive to defend against, and Trump's always shown that he'll just continually throw money at a situation until, in court to keep it going.
Right.
But, it comes down to a really basic premise in a small d democratic society. The press is supposed to be antagonistic against the government,
Yeah.
and they have very much acquiesced that responsibility across all sectors. It's not just about Disney, right? And I don't understand it, right? I mean, I train journalists for a living, and I don't understand why the sort of the values that I learned all those many decades ago in Oshkosh are not like still being drilled into these people at the highest level. I mean, there's Gen Xers and old boomers still running these media companies, and I don't know where's the fire, where's the fight that we used to have. It's all gone, and I don't get it. Like, I don't understand it. Like, this is a time for the press to shine. We have an administration that's engaged in every kind of abuse you could imagine. This is what the press is designed. This is why we have a First Amendment, is for times like this. But again, it comes back to the finger gun. If I can point a finger gun at you and get you to give me your wallet, right? Why would I not do it? Right? If I can
And
beat
it, and it,
Trump and I can bully everybody into doing exactly what I want, and they're not even going to try to fight back, I'm going to do that. It's hard to blame the guy, right?
do you think, we started off talking about the FCC. Do you think okay, the FCC was created in 1934, correct, with the original Telecommunication Act? And uh, do you think the FCC in this day and age is it kind of passé? I mean, obviously Brendan Carr wants to use it in his own way as a weapon against content they don't like. But do you think that we've reached a point now where the FCC either has to be reformed? I mean, its mission has to be reformed, or maybe we should get rid of it entirely. Well, like, what's your view on what the FCC should be doing in the 21st century?
Well, I think that it's endemic across administrative agencies that they've become inherently more political than they were ever designed to be.
Yeah.
Right? They're the cogs in the machine, and they're not supposed to. I mean, they're you can't separate the politics from it, especially at the commissioner level. But where we really see the problems with not only the FCC but the FTC and some of the other three-letter agencies at this point is that the politics has gone down below the commissioner level and has really infected the staff levels as well. And that
Right.
really gets away from what those agencies are supposed to do. You take a bunch of people who are really smart about what those agencies are supposed to do. They're experts in it, and you put them in a room so that they can come up with the best solution without sort of the influence of politics, right? Congress tells them what to do. Like, we want a regulation on this, and then they put a bunch of smart people in the room and figure out the best way to do that. And then that's the way administrative agencies are supposed to work. But now you have polluted those agencies with people who want to use them to grind. I mean, you have a Federal Trade Commission right now that is trying to enforce antitrust law and deception enforcement against pornography providers. I mean, it's preposterous, and it's really just axes being ground along political lines, and it
Well,
makes
it's
no
really
sense, and
sad,
it's
right?
really a
Because
shame, frankly.
yeah, well, it's sad because Biden didn't he had Lena Khan at the FTC, correct? And she was one of the really great reformers. And then JD Vance during the campaign let people believe that, oh yeah, we might keep Lena Khan on because we're very critical of corporate America. And then literally she gets fired on day one when Trump gets
Well, I
in.
mean, it's natural for the chairman of a committee to get, or an agency to get fired when presidential
Oh, yeah, of
administrations
course. But
change.
they
But
suggested they might not do that.
yeah, that was preposterous, and anybody who believe that, I've got a bridge I can sell you too. So, but I mean, to answer your question about the FCC, the problem is that the FCC is kind of old, and there are other agencies that have some adjacent powers to the FCC. If they put me in charge and gave me all the power, I would restructure the FCC and make sure that it understood what it was supposed to be doing now.
Yes.
And I mean, we still need the agency. It still does actually really important work that doesn't have anything to do with Brendan Carr's personal access to grind. It still allocates spectrum, still in charge of broadband deployment things. I mean, there is work that happens every day there that's actually really important. But
Yeah.
the thing about Carr is he is a showboat, right? And he's a dedicated Trumpist. He wrote a chapter in the Project 2025
He
book
did.
about what he wanted to do. But it all comes down to one really simple thing. Carr has always wanted to be a content regulator. And especially against content that he politically hates. I've been saying it for a decade. No one listened to me about it. I was talking about this guy 10 years ago, and people thought I was crazy. I'm like, they called him a technocrat at one point. I'm like, no, he's not. And I mean, what we're seeing is what I predicted would happen when they put him in charge of the agency. Remember that under the first Trump administration, we had Ajit Pai. Ajit Pai was a hardcore, dedicated conservative technocrat. He wanted to get rid of regulations and allow media and tech companies to run rampant and make as much money as possible. But
Right.
even then, even against that backdrop, Carr was in conflict with Pai on all kinds of issues. And right at the end of the previous Trump administration, they had it out over Section 230. Pai didn't want to touch that because that's a defense for tech industry. But Carr absolutely wants to reform that because it'll give the FCC authority to regulate. I mean, very simply.
Give us the Cliff Note version of what Section 230 is.
Section 230 is a 1996 law that was part of the Communications Decency Act. But what it basically does is it allows internet platforms and social media places to have protection for the content that you and I post on it. Carr wants that to go away. He wants platforms to have to moderate every single post on them so that he can dictate what kind of content can be on them. And without Section 230, it's very likely that we would see, especially after Free Speech Coalition versus PACs in the summer, and now that the internet is subject to intermediate scrutiny, we would very likely see a cable level regulation scheme applied to internet content. Right now, if I own a social media platform and you post a bunch of stuff on there, I'm not responsible for anything that you say.
Right.
But absent Section 230, I'm responsible for everything that you say.
Exactly.
And
so
that's
clearly
what Carr
that's why
has long sought, right?
Right. That's why the platform owners obviously want to keep Section 230 in place, right?
And that's why Pai fought with Carr over it in March
Right.
of 2020 when Trump tried to get Section 230 repealed during the first Trump administration. Carr was out there, Mr. Burnsing it at one point on Fox
Yeah.
News about it.
Let me ask you about the internet platforms and how they should handle, controversial speech or information. Are you a free speech absolutist on these issues? I mean, for example, like with X that Elon Musk has owned now for the last few years, is it your view that, hey, if Nazis and white nationalists and anarchists, various controversial folks out there, if they want to post, more power to it, the answer should be for people to be critical thinkers, buyer beware? Or do you think that, kind of like what the Biden administration was trying to do, try to aggressively get these platforms to police themselves? I mean, what's your view on this?
Well, I think you're talking about two sides of the same coin. I think platforms can do a better job of policing themselves, but I also don't think that the government should be involved in that process. Remember, Musk owns Twitter or X, whatever we call it these days. It's his house. He can treat it however he wants, right? It's 830 Scott Street. If he wants to invite a bunch of people over and trash the place, that's his business. But what's important is that the government is not involved in that process. And yes, you trained me to be an absolutist, whether you meant to or not, back in the day. Made an extremist out of me, by the way. But that said, remember that the all-important concept in free speech and the First Amendment is state action. Right? It only protects us against the government. It doesn't protect us from the platforms. Do I think they could do a better job of policing up some of the really nasty stuff? Sure. But it's not up to me to decide that for them. And I really would object to the government being put in the role of that because I can see where that leads very quickly. Yes, do I object to Nazi speech? I certainly object to it. I certainly object to people like Westboro Baptist Church. But I'd rather have that stuff be available and not have the government deciding what we can see online than the alternative to that.
Okay. Well, kind of related to this, Chris. So in the follow-up to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we have seen a number of people fired from jobs, doxxed for expressing either glee at Charlie Kirk's death or not being sufficiently mournful. You know, this has especially gone on in public schools and things like that. So right here in Oshkosh, we've got a situation going on right now where a teacher on his private social media, right, said essentially the world is better off without Kirk. But then he said, but I don't really wish death on anybody, blah, blah, blah. And there are attempts to get this guy disciplined or fired. I mean, what's your view on things like this? I mean, should anyone be doxxed or fired because of what they say about Charlie Kirk? Rest in peace.
Well, I mean, again, this comes down to the discrepancy between what is free speech and what is the First Amendment, right? One of the things that I think is really interesting about free speech today as a general concept and theory is that everybody wants free speech, but they don't want the consequences that come along with free speech, right? Well, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And this is very true on the conservative side, by the way,
Oh,
right? They want to
yeah.
be able to say whatever they want without any societal consequences for it. But that's not how it works, right? That our system has always been based on a system of subsequent punishment, that you could say whatever you wanted to say, but you could be punished for it rather substantially for it afterwards. What's different about our system than any other system on earth, frankly, is that the First Amendment protects you from the government doing that, but it never has protected you from societal, things. In the case of a school teacher, if it's a public school teacher, that's state action against him. That's a different sort of scenario. He
Right.
shouldn't be punished for that. But if people object to the things that you say, they can shun you. They can do things. You don't have a protection against a private employer. Now, I don't think that that's how it should be, but that is how it works, right?
Hmm.
I certainly had one of those people who's sad that Charlie Kirk died. I don't like political violence.
No.
But I mean, again, Kirk fostered the kind of environment that led to that, right? And I'm not talking about his speech. I'm talking about the fact that he actually advocated for guns on college campuses, right? I mean, that's, you can't separate those two things. And if that makes me unpopular and people want to yell at me and scream at me, you won't be the first people
Well,
to
and I
yell and
mean,
scream at me
I
for
mean,
an
let's face it.
unpopular view.
His organization created the Professor Watch List, and lots of people on that Professor Watch List have faced nonstop death threat. So that is
Well,
the way
remember when I
someone, yeah,
when
go
I
ahead.
outed Scott Walker, I
Uh,
became like when I pointed out that Scott Walker wasn't ready for prime time before he ran for president, I became talk radio's uh, public enemy number one for a time. And
right.
I mean, I was I was literally the worst person in the conservative hate spear for about 11
I
days at
remember
one
that.
point. Yeah. And so I mean, I know what it's like to have that apparatus turned against you.
Me too.
But that was a consequence. Now, in that particular case, I thought those comments I gave to that reporter were supposed to be off the record, but details, right? But the point is that I was willing to accept those lumps. They were tough lumps, by the way, but I was willing to accept those lumps for the speech that I engaged in. But, you know, I'm one of those people who recognizes that if I say something, there are potential consequences for that. But I'm willing to stand up for those consequences on principle because I'd rather have the right to say something and be able to live with the consequences of saying it than the alternative, which is not being able to say it at all,
Do you
right?
think though, just philosophically, should we as a culture be trying to evolve, let's say,
Oh, well, sure.
to the point where there should be consequences for your actions, but very frequently there are consequences for words. And even though you are 1,000% correct, the First Amendment has been interpreted not as saying you have absolute speech rights, right? After you speak, anything can happen. But in a very real sense, doesn't that kind of make a mockery of the First Amendment?
Well, this is the old idea of repressive tolerance, right? That the Marcuse idea that
Yeah,
people won't say things because they are afraid of the potential consequences that exist.
right.
And I mean, do I think people should be doxxed for having an opinion on Charlie Kirk? No, of course not. But that's the reality is that there are a lot of people who object to various points of view, right?
Right.
And I think that one thing that people need to remember, and this isn't just true of Kirk, but a lot, so much of the speech like Kirk's, not Kirk specifically, but Kirk like speech is subsidized to the point to make it stand tall in the marketplace of ideas, right? There's so many of the influencers on the conservative side are artificially magnified in the public sphere. And that means that the response to those things is also going to be artificially magnified. And that's why you take people and you dox them and you fire them or you make their lives miserable so that other people are silenced and they choose not to. They are repressively toleranced against the idea of
I,
participating in the public
you know,
sphere.
I think
But
you're
you got to
making such
stand
an
tall.
important, yeah, I think you're making such an important point because these movements, especially on the right wing, present themselves as grassroots, bottom up, street level activism, but they're really what I guess we would call astroturf movements.
Yes, very much so.
There's usually a billionaire or two behind the scenes that's putting the money in. And of course, one of the conspiracy theories that's developing around Charlie Kirk is that he somehow offended some of the funders of Turning Point USA, especially on the issue of Israel Palestine. And, so the conspiracy theories will keep the internet hopping now for years, right?
Well, I think it's important to remember that regardless of the motivations of the shooter, Kirk was in an active, open dispute with some of the more conservative elements in that group
He
over a
was.
lot of things, right? I mean, Kirk was very much for the release of the Epstein files, for example, which is not a real popular view on in some corners there. But that said, it still comes back to a really basic point that Kirk was a community college dropout. He rose to fame because somebody sponsored him as a columnist at Breitbart.com. And then he set up his little stupid table and deliberately antagonized people online. And he turned his shitposting career into a career, right? I mean, I give the guy credit for turning nothing into a a multi-million dollar campaign, but it still was. It didn't start organically, right? It was artificially magnified in the public sphere, and that's what we're seeing in a lot of these responses to people who have spoken out in sort of a negative way to him being killed, is
Mhm.
that you do that to try to shut off the dissent, right? You try to convince
Exactly.
people that if you speak out, these things are going to happen to you. And what you're trying to do there is ramp down on dissent. And of course, as I try to convince my students, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, that's exactly the time you got to speak louder, right? You got to fight back. You got to talk back. But that is that is what we need our media system to do right now. And they have chosen to just abandon that quest. And it's really hard for somebody who believes in sort of these like, sort of core values and fundamental principles at small d democracy to watch it happen because this was your moment, man. You can't get by on Watergate anymore. Like that was a long time ago, right? You've
Right.
got to stand up and stand tall, and they're not doing it. And if there was any time it would be easy to do it, it would be right now.
Exactly. Well, and we're getting close to the end here, Chris, but let me ask you, is there a way to get it back? I mean, can you imagine a scenario where we do have a, uh, a media system, and especially an establishment media that does perform the kind of critical analysis and
It's gonna take a
yeah,
scandal to shake them loose, but one that's easy enough for them to report where the good guys and the bad guys are clear. We've seen this story before. Remember Iran Contra?
oh
Remember the
yeah,
good guys and the bad guys were very clear, and it drew the nation's attention in a way that, like, it was really just a covert military op gone bad, right? But then all of a sudden you have these just horrible characters dealing with other horrible characters, and you have this multi-level scandal. It's going to take something like that to sort of
but
some
let me
some
ask you
kind
this,
of
Chris.
story narrative that they can tell
I
to
agree,
shake them loose.
but can there be that kind of scandal in the social media age?
I
I mean,
don't
I
know.
wonder if Reagan and Oliver North and all those people, if there had been the kind of social media that we have now, would they have been able just to very easily spin it away?
Well, they had. a good chunk of the conservative media apparatus, talk radio was fully in
Yeah.
blow. I mean, I can remember listening to Limbaugh talking about Ollie North at the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was there. It was in a different form, but it's still it's going to take something like that. It's going to take a catalyst that they can all jump on at the same time and then try to outcompete each other for that kind of a story. But it's going to have to be something, monumental in
Oh,
scale.
and it's not like there's a shortage, right? I mean, I think there's so many
Well,
scandals right now, but like you said, they've kind of given up. I mean, I've been a subscriber to the New York Times for a lot of years now, and I have no idea what the New York Times is doing,
no, it's kind of
right?
funny to watch almost. It's
It,
like
it-
almost
it's
like a
it's
parody of
I mean, the
itself.
way they minimize, right, some of the most horrible things going on. I mean, what I guess they've calculated that somehow if they just present things as factually true as possible, that's going to hurt their bottom line.
I I kind of wonder if the midterms go the Democrats' way and they're able to start turning over rocks, if that's what does it. Like I'm not saying I put a lot of faith in that, but you could have a steady stream of stuff coming out of Congress that draws attention and then they, would sort of shake them loose. But they're all doing it, right? Nobody's standing tall. So they've all kind of agreed to sort of acquiesce. And that's why I think it takes sort of a universal event to catalyze them. Because they have to compete against each other. Right now they're competing each other for who can knuckle under the fastest. But if they can get, well, that's just true, Tony. If
I
they can
know.
get something that can get them to compete in the other direction, it'll shake them loose.
I mean,
It doesn't exist right now.
The Washington Post recently fired Karen Attiah, one of the great journalists of her
Yes.
generation, because she put out a series of tweets that there's no way she celebrated Charlie Kirk's death.
No, she quoted him directly.
She quoted him directly, and she was raising some serious questions, right? Especially as a black woman in America, and here's what Charlie Kirk actually said, like what the hell is going on with the Washington Post?
Well, it's ownership. All comes back to who controls the media, Tony. I think you might have taught me that back in the 90s
Yeah.
when we were together back when.
Back in the day, you remember Ben Bagdikian's
Oh,
great book,
sure.
right? The Media
Yeah. Probably
Monopoly.
got his book. I probably could reach
Yeah.
up and grab
And
it
I
here.
mean, even I, back in the day, when I first read that book, The Media Monopoly, I thought, okay, maybe Ben is just exaggerating here, right? And now it turns out that you talk about spot on books.
Oh, yeah. He called it. Actually, look,
Do you have it? Here we go. Yep. The Media Monopoly, Ben Bagdikian.
I think you gave me this copy.
I may have, Chris, and I'll tell you, at the time, even I thought, yeah, maybe he's kind of exaggerating. If anything, he didn't go far enough.
No, he could not have anticipated how far it would be.
All of those 1980s media
Yeah.
critics, right? Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, Bagdikian, Neil Postman, Entertaining Ourselves to Death.
Right.
I mean, all of those dudes were on to something big. And sadly, we're living through this nightmare right now.
Yeah. Well, we changed.
Did you see Jon Stewart's bit last week where he was kind of like playing this role of a pro-Trump broadcaster, and he was
No.
doing it very satirically, but I was watching it thinking, he's kind of portraying what is going on right now.
Remember that for the longest time, our media system was designed around a concept, both structurally and a value system, in making sure that we had access to political information.
Yeah.
But with the 1996 Telecommunications Act, that value system was replaced by one where we thought a media system would work better if it made more money, if we could find ways to make it more efficient. We let the economists set the values, and we are living with those constitutive choices that we made in the 1996. And the internet was built on that value system. It was designed around that value system.
It sure
And I
was.
fundamentally believe that is the moment at which everything changed, right? And I might have spent a little time studying and thinking about this too, is that when we change this core value from small d democracy, access to political information and freedom of speech, to one that is based around economics as a way to achieve those goals, well, if economics is the core value, you're going to build a media system that reflects economic value. And
All right.
that's one we have.
All right. On that note, got to let you go, Chris. Let's do this again soon. It's not like there's a shortage of topics to talk about.
Never ever.
All right.
It's always good to see you, Tony.
Same here.